thank you for honouring me with your presence. It looks like we've got a full house to bursting point. So we're going to be looking at some smart workflows for smart photographers, because I know you're all smart out there. So let's jump in. I'm into Lightroom, and we're going to be sort of moving around. We'll be going out onto the cloud, but also using Lightroom and Photoshop CC. Okay, so I'm just going to press the F key on the keyboard. That goes into full screen, and that allows me then to cycle through some of the slides. Okay, so we'll get cracking. I'll be touching on a few points which I can only sort of skim the surface of, but I'm going to give you access to some deeper learning. If you go to my website, markgaylor.com, you'll find a link which is downloads. Everything in that section, downloads, is free, so I'm not here to sell you anything. In my time, I've been an author of 30 books about photography and using software, but now I just tend to write ebooks and put them on my website and allow people to download them for free. Okay, so I'll be mentioning this at times when you can go to the website and download something as I touch on some of the things we're going to be moving through today. The other thing is you can also catch up with me on Facebook. You can follow me, you can friend me, you can just message me if you like. My Facebook profile is only used for photographic purposes, so you will not get to see pictures of my dog or what I'm eating for breakfast. Okay, so some of you who've flown in, maybe on Qantas, may see that one of the images in the Qantas in-flight magazine was one of mine. I'm also just been made a Sony Global Imaging Ambassador. So as well as being an Adobe Imaging Ambassador for Australia and New Zealand, I'm also very much on the capture part of the workflow. Now this is a bit.ly. You can take a picture of this, but I'm also going to make this entire slide deck available to you if you want to take a mobile phone grab of that. So, because you've only got to get one of those characters wrong, and then you won't actually get the slides. Okay, so the important aspect of that bit.ly obviously is the 2T, capital B, small case W, 2G3. Okay, and the reason that I can share that with you is if I just press the F key and come out, I'll just press the F8 key to hide the panel on the left-hand side. You'll see that I'm presenting from a collection. And if I was to right-click on that collection, you can see that I'm syncing this collection with Lightroom Mobile. If I add any images to this collection, they're automatically going to get uploaded and be available online. Okay, now generally when you sync a collection such as this, I'll just press the G key to go into grid view. The collection you sync isn't actually public, it's private. You can access those images on your mobile devices, but they're not public. But you can click on a little icon on the top right-hand side and then toggle between make public and make private. And I'm just going in there just by clicking on that link, and you can see here is all the slide deck that I've made available. And you can actually download the entire slide deck there just by clicking on the download button. If you're syncing collections, that download might not automatically be activated. What you would need to do is you would need to log in to your Creative Cloud on the web, come to your Lightroom section, and then click on the little gear wheel, okay, next to the collection that you've just synchronized. And here you have some sharing options. And what I've done is I've enabled downloads. This is a great way to share images with clients and family and friends without worrying about sending them via email. Okay. So let's just switch back over to Lightroom and go back into my slide deck. Okay. Okay, so just to recap, anytime you want to make a collection and synchronize it with your cloud, just right-click or just click on that little icon just at the bottom there. If you just click on that, it will start that syncing process. And I'm going to talk some more about those features as we go through this workflow. Okay, so if you log in, if you just go adobe.com, you're going to get invited to log into your cloud account. And there is the Lightroom Photos option there amongst many of the other options. Okay, and just to recap again, allowing downloads, and you can also pick up that link and share the link via email as well. Okay, so today's topic, smart workflows. Okay, so we're going to go through my whole imaging workflow from beginning to end, really, looking at some of the important aspects that I think everybody really needs to examine from once in a while to make sure that the workflow is moving both quickly but also optimizing quality. Okay, so the first aspect of this is color management. Now, everybody who opens up the menus on their cameras will see that we usually get two options on the cameras, which is sRGB or Adobe RGB, and there's a date, 1998. Adobe implemented color management in Photoshop nearly 20 years ago, and it's always slightly disconcerting for me when I work in the industry and send things off for publishing and press, is half of the people in the industry don't understand color management after 20 years of its implementation. And it's really not rocket science. You just need to do some very important points. Okay, so this is a picture of two of my profiling devices. Some people refer to them as calibration, but calibration and profiling are two different things, okay? And I don't have the time really to make you understand the difference, but I'm going to give you a link to a 50-page ebook you can download and sort of skill up on the subject of color management. The device on the bottom right-hand side calibrates my monitor. Everybody should calibrate the monitor, because as you pass images on through a chain of people in the industry, they're all going to see something slightly different if they haven't profiled their monitor. If they've profiled the monitor, and it doesn't matter if it's a different make to your monitor, the colors are going to look faithful on their monitor the way you prepared them on yours. And that's obviously very important for some clients who have key colors that need to represent what they're about. You can imagine how Cadbury would feel if their purple skewed to a blue. Okay, that would be tragic. And so we always have to make sure those colors are faithful as they're passed down the imaging workflow. How many people here have calibrated their monitors? Okay, I reckon that's probably less than half. Okay, that is a minimum really for me to work in the industry. 30 books, and often I had to educate the publisher about color management. Okay, because they're passing the books down the line. Okay, the thing that's standing up is a color passport or a color checker. It's called different things because there's two main companies that make these. X-Rite is one and Spider is the other. Okay, so this is a color passport. This profiles my camera. How many people here profile their camera? That's 1%, okay? All cameras, even if they're the same model of camera, will see color slightly differently, okay? This is a $100 device. If you don't leave it out in the sun, it'll probably last you your life. And you can profile every camera you buy from now to when you stop buying cameras. Okay, so the other thing that a lot of people don't understand is, and this is where calibration and profiling, you need to understand the difference between the two. Apple Mac monitors weren't very good a few years back. And it was down to the gamut and the bit depth. People went out of their way to buy professional monitors, such as made by the company ASO, in order to get that bigger gamut, bigger range of colors, and also the bigger bit depth. The latest 27-inch 5K monitors do have that extra gamut and that extra bit depth. They're 10-bit monitors now instead of 8-bit, so they can be calibrated as well as profiled, rather than using the native luminance and the native white balance. Okay, so if you don't know what much of that is, I will give you the link that you can download that PDF. So what you do with these color calibration for the cameras is you take one picture of the camera in one light source, sunlight, shade, then you change the light source, maybe tungsten or maybe just sunlight and shade, and then you create what's called a dual illuminant profile. That profile is used and picked up by Lightroom, Photoshop, Adobe Camera Raw, and then gives you accurate, faithful colors. How many times have you heard people say, I prefer Canon to a Nikon when dealing with portraiture because the skin tones look better? That argument ceases to raise its head if you profile the camera, because if you profile the Nikon and you profile the Canon and a Sony, the skin tones would look the same. Okay, so let's take a look at this. This is my daughter, and it's a raw file. So we'll just press the F key and we'll press the D key to go into develop. And I'll do a Command 9, that's Control 9, to bring up the calibration panel, the least visited panel inside of Lightroom, but the most important. This is where we pick up the profile of the camera. Now, by default, the default starting point in Lightroom is Adobe standard. It's a very flat starting point. And some people who use Capture One, an alternative to Lightroom, say that they prefer the colors in Capture One because they have more pop. Okay, and that's because Capture One doesn't use Adobe standard because it's not an Adobe product. They tend to refer to the profiles given to them by the camera manufacturers. You watch the colors move when I choose camera portraiture. Okay, so the colors pop. I've made no adjustments in any panels other than changing the starting point profile. Now that camera portrait is one profile for all of the cameras in that model number, but the cameras have variations. And so in order to profile the camera, I would create my own profile of the A7R dual illuminant. Now those colors are faithful. Okay, the skin tones, the blues, they're all faithful to the colors that I was actually observing on the day. So if you're photographing fabrics, or you're a wedding photographer, or you're working with clients with specific colors, I would recommend that you profile your camera and then use that profile rather than Adobe standard. Okay. If you're working with printers, you may not own a printer anymore, but you still occasionally need to print things, or you need to pass things off to magazines. One of the questions you should ask is, can I have your profiles? It's amazing how many times people don't actually know what you're asking of them, and yet they're working in the industry. There are some very good printers who make their profiles available, and you can download them, and then Lightroom and Photoshop can use those profiles. Okay, so you don't need to buy any equipment to make a profile for a printer. Okay, if you do own a printer, all you need to do is download one of these targets. It's called, often referred to as an IT8 target. You print it out, send it back to the lab, they make the profile for you, and they can email you the profile back. And then you have a much more accurate profile for your own printer. Okay, soft proof. So once we've got these profiles, you do something called soft proofing. Let's just move over and show you this very saturated color. We're in the develop module, D for develop. Right down on the toolbar, if you can't see the toolbar, press T. It has been known to disappear by people who tap the letter T. Soft proofing, okay, changes the background behind the image. Something else changes as well. Notice we've got these clipping warnings here. If you press the J key, you'll see that there is a very small amount of clipping in the chrome. It's a very small amount of red there. The highlights are just clipping ever so slightly. But when we go into soft proofing, these are no longer shadow and highlight clipping warnings. They're gamut clipping warnings, and you don't switch them on both at the same time. because one is a monitor gamut clipping and the other one is a paper gamut clipping. Gamut is the range of colours that devices can see. We all have a fixed range of colours. You know, some hummingbirds can see colours that are beyond the human visible spectrum. There are some colours beyond the CMYK range of colours that can be printed on paper. It's very useful knowing these colours because disturbing things happen when we send colours that are too saturated to output devices that can't manage them. I did some consultancy with a company that were working with dropping in fake blue skies over real estate images, but all of those skies were stepping and banding because the colours, the blues they were sending to the printers were out of gamut. Because CMYK doesn't have a blue ink, it has a cyan ink, and it has to simulate blue as best it can. And it was doing exceptionally badly with these very, very saturated blue skies. Now, one of the craziest things is most people get disappointed with some print, but they fail to realise that here I've calibrated this laptop i1 native CC, native meaning that I haven't calibrated, I've actually just profiled it, and some of those colours there, they're out of the range of the monitor. There may be more detail in those colours that are not being displayed because I've hit the limitations of the monitor. So those colours might look very flat on my monitor, but print with more detail if the printer has a better colour gamut than the monitor. Okay, so let's switch off that one. Let's pick up a printer profile. Okay, this is a matte heavyweight. Okay, and we'll click on the paper now, and you'll see less clipping, but still a little bit of clipping. We could go and search for a better printing paper. That's a matte heavyweight. This is a premium glossy. Well, there you go. Premium glossy can, just changing the paper surface and the profile that accompanies that paper surface means that there is no clipping. So that yellow will actually look better in print than on my monitor. It's usually the other way around. We're often disappointed with some of the colours that don't look as saturated in print. But you can see that we can choose different paper surfaces. If the client said, no, you can't choose, that the magazine has a particular paper and it's this one, okay, what can we do about that? We can go into the HSL panel. We can click on that little targeted adjustment tool, go over to the colours that are slightly out of gamut and pull them down. Now we can send that image to press, knowing that there's going to be as much saturation as the output device can handle with maximum amount of detail. If you send oversaturated colours to printing presses, they may appear saturated, but they will also be devoid of textural detail. They will look like vinyl or plastic because they're flat. Okay. So let's, that's inviting me to do is to make a proof copy. Make this a proof or create proof copy. So that when I come out of previewing that, I'll hit done here, we'll see that we'll have in grid view, we'll have two. One is the master, unretouched. One is a modified version for a specific output device. So when we retouch, if we don't know where it's going, we just retouch so it looks good on our monitor. But as soon as we know where it's going, we can do extra work to ensure that it's the best possible image for its output source. Okay, so that's colour management, and I did say that it's a very large topic and I've covered it in only a few minutes. So there is a 50-page ebook which you can download. It's been an actual course in a college, this whole ebook. So you're basically getting everything, not everything, but the basic essentials for what you need to understand about colour management. It even goes into the best light globes you could install in your own home that has the biggest colour gamut. So if you need to view prints late at night and you don't have access to daylight, there is a specific light globe called a Solux globe, which they often use to assess prints. Okay, so the need for speed. Okay, I get this a lot. I find myself on forums, and people like getting angry online, I've noticed. And sometimes somebody will say something which strictly isn't true. There's a popular misconception amongst photographers that Lightroom is getting slower. And I thought about this for a while, and I've held this belief for a very long time, that often what we're asking of our computers is we're expecting our computers to do more than we used to do. So I rolled the clock back 5 years for myself, and in 2012 I was using a Nikon D700 with 12 megapixels, and I was outputting those images on screen that I was editing with using a 4 megapixel HD, which was considered high resolution at the time. That's 2,560 pixels wide. Okay, roll forward 5 years, and I'm using a 42.4 megapixel full frame camera, okay, a Sony a7R II, and my 5K monitor is 14.75 megapixels. I'm asking my computer to do 3 times more. I'm asking Lightroom to read 3 times more pixels, and when I modify them, to change the display of those pixels on the screen. Now look at how the top of the range iMac, this is if you spec'd it all out. Okay, you bought the extra RAM, you bought the extra processor. 5 years ago, we had quad-core Intel i7 processors running at 3.6 gigahertz. 5 years forward, we've got the same processors running at 4 gigahertz. When I'm going through the revolution, the imaging revolution, I couldn't wait to chop my computer in every 18 months to 2 years. We were doubling the performance pretty much every 2 years. I think the computer manufacturers have fallen asleep on the job, personally. Adobe have put out things on forums very recently that they know photographers are getting frustrated with speed in Lightroom, which probably means that they've worked out how to make it faster. So I suspect we're going to get a faster Lightroom, but you always have to work out what else has been happening. The other thing that's been slowing things down for people is a lot of people didn't do cloud activity 5 years ago. They didn't have Dropbox, Google Drive. Adobe's cloud is a cloud service, so all of those can be running in the background. And if you've only got a dual core processor, one side of your processor is tied up doing slow moving repetitive stuff that takes away some of the performance of Lightroom. A lot of people have virus protection running all of the time on PCs and don't switch it off to leverage more processing power, when they need to get some grunt going in their workflow. What I'm trying to do here is basically say that a lot of people like to point the finger at one thing and then do nothing about their workflow because it's somebody else's fault. And as a consultant, I often go in and try and leverage faster workflows from companies. And I look not at one thing, the software, I look at everything in the workflow. To give you an example, memory cards have been getting faster and faster, and the fastest ones are called class 10. There is nothing higher than class 10. But the difference between these two cards is the one on the right is 700% faster than the one on the left. Okay, now a lot of people I see connect cameras directly to their computer. 95% of the in-out ports on side of modern DSLRs is not USB 3, it's USB 2. And USB 2 has a ceiling of 60 megabytes per second transfer. Most people can afford $15 to buy a USB 3 card reader to access 640 megabytes per second transfer rate. There you go, 700% faster on a card and 1,000% faster on just how you connect the card to your laptop or computer. So, and that's just one example of like 50 things in a workflow that I would go and look at to try and get efficient workflows running through the whole workflow, because that's what smart photographers do. Okay, If you were in Julianne Cost's session, she looked at setting new defaults. We looked at changing the profile in the camera calibration tab. Okay, so I'll just skip forward because you probably don't need me to go through that manually, other than you can do more than just putting a new profile. And what Julianne Cost did in her session just half an hour ago, she also added the lens profiles. Okay, so let's just zoom in there. What Julianne Cost did was she enabled the profile corrections. You'll notice there's a tiny little I at the bottom of that dialogue. You need to read that. Notice Julianne read the little dialogue. Okay, it says built-in lens profile applied. One of the things that happens with camera manufacturers in the last couple of years is they're not leaving RAW alone anymore. It's not raw anymore, it's partly cooked. Olympus, for instance, don't give their profiles to Adobe. They apply the lens profiles to the raw files in camera. If that is happening, a Lightroom will tell you that the profiles have already been applied. You don't need to apply them again. Okay, so let's just zoom out and zoom back in. One of the things that some people on forums have said to me is another piece of software, Capture One, produces sharper looking images than Lightroom, and that is because their default for sharpening is double that of Lightroom. It's not actually better at making sharper images, they've just raised the default. And so if you always find yourself sharpening more of your images, 25 isn't what you like, you'd much prefer 50 or 60 or 70, then you can add that now, okay? And as well as the lens corrections, as well as the profile, and write all of that into the default as well, okay? So the other thing that I've done there, which there isn't a red arrow to, is the fact that the luminance has also got 15 added. Okay, if you print very, very large exhibition style prints, even on 100 ISO, you might find a small, very small amount of noise reduction just makes things like skies and very smooth areas of color absolutely smooth. There is no image data in those areas. It's a personal preference, but that's the idea of creating a new default, is that you don't have to do those every time. They're automatically applied on import. If you go to an image that's already in your catalog and hit reset, then it adopts the new default, not the old default. Okay, let's come to the import workflow. Okay, now I'll just come out of that, so I'll just click on the import here. Most people, when they click on the import dialog, they work like this. It's a huge, intimidating box, but the import dialog is sticky settings. It remembers what it did last time. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't pay attention to, especially the destination of where the files are going. And it can lead to files being sent all over the place, and I always like to collate all of the files that I'm importing to a very similar location. Adobe would prefer they go to your pictures folder by default. Let's just cancel that out and go back to my slide. Oh, let's just do that one more time, because what I was going to show you is that little arrow in the left-hand side is when you've got all of your settings finalized, you can collapse that panel and you can create what's called an import preset. So rather than having to select all of those options each time or check all of those options, you know all of those options are already written in to a preset. All you need to do is enter the keywords and click OK. That's it. Okay, so we'll cancel that out and go back into my slide. So I always recommend organising consistently, and if you haven't already done so, create a metadata preset or two. I will typically have a preset for going to the local hard drive, one to my mirrored RAID, also a preset usually for adding files that are already on the computer, not coming in from a memory card. Okay. I organise by date and date format, and I tend not to bury my files too deeply on my computer because periodically I need to back them all up and I need just to drag one folder, not find that they're in 28 separate folders on 4 different drives. Okay. This one is because I do a lot of work with people in camera clubs and colleges, and I see a lot of folders with question marks and exclamation marks on images. They're missing files, missing folders. Can I just state this very clearly? It's not Lightroom's fault. It's yours. Okay, because what a lot of people do, a lot of people predate Lightroom. Most people in this room probably predate Lightroom. And so what happens is when I ask somebody, or show me the images, they open up a Finder window on their operating system. And I go, what are you doing? I'm showing you the images. Why are you not in Lightroom? The worst thing that happens is when they start moving them, renaming them, deleting them, opening them up into Photoshop from a browser Finder window, because that is Lightroom's raison d'etre. And why are you stealing its thunder? And what Lightroom will do when you next open Lightroom is if you've done any of those things, it's going to say, you've been working behind my back, so here's a question mark, because I don't understand what you've been doing. You shouldn't have been doing it. And so try and get yourself out of the habit. Every time you're looking at a folder of images or an image in a Finder window, close it down. You have to break that habit. And that includes Bridge. Lightroom should come with a health warning saying, you've chosen to use Lightroom, stop using Bridge. Lightroom doesn't know of Bridge's existence, and Bridge can modify metadata. Okay, and when it modifies the metadata, Lightroom rewards you with a metadata conflict and then invites you, would you like to import or overwrite? And a lot of people look at the dialogue going, I don't understand the question. How do I make a reasoned answer? Okay, so the other important thing about catalogue, the ABC, is always add keywords. I know we're always very keen to see our images very quickly, but add at least 3 keywords, because that's how we find our images. Not by remembering which named folder on which drive they're in, but we basically do what we do for everything in our modern lives is we Google them. We punch in a bunch of words hoping it will magically appear on screen, and that's what Lightroom will do for you. If you put in keywords, it will show you the files with those words. Okay, so backup files and catalogue. Lightroom often invites you to back up the catalogue, but it never backs up the files. That is your job, to back up the files. And there is an old rule in photography, it's called the 3-2-1 rule. 3 copies of every image that's valuable to you on 2 different media, 2 different drives, and one of those copies has to be off-site in case your house burns down. And that one off-site used to be something that I would drive to work, but now it's the cloud. The cloud is that one off-site. I also collate all of my assets, my images, onto a mirrored RAID. How many people use a mirrored RAID? Wow, that's really low. Okay, I wouldn't sleep at night if I didn't use a mirrored RAID. This is a very portable, small mirrored RAID. There are others. This is the one that I use. It's a lacy, rugged mirrored RAID. It's a 4 terabyte drive. It's reduced to 2 terabytes when you set it up as a mirrored RAID, because one drive is basically duplicating everything on the other drive. It's for people who forget to back up because it's backing up. You've only got to write it to the drive once and then it backs up itself. Okay? It comes with a piece of software that tells you if one of the drives is not well, which is basically an invite to go and buy another drive. Okay, this is the one that I actually use in my office. It's a 20 terabyte RAID 5. 4 of them are coloured that cyan colour, that blue colour, is because one drive can fail, the other 4 drives knows what's on that drive that's just failed. They support each other. And the software say drive 3 is failed, you eject it, you put a new drive in. For about, I don't know, 12 hours, the drive sorts itself out and then said, I'm happy again, ready for business. Never lose an image. Always try and look for one. This one's got a Thunderbolt I/O because I'm Mac orientated, although you can get Thunderbolt ports on PC. Okay, but USB-C is the next in out. USB 2 and 3 will be retired. So if you're future-proofing yourself, either get Thunderbolt or USB-C. Okay. For those people who don't want to buy RAIDs, just remember there is an option on the import dialog to back up on import. So you never have to remember to do it. Because remember that setting is sticky. So if you check it, you select your external drive and then you hit import. If you forget to connect the external drive on import, Lightroom will say, I can't find the drive because it's not connected, so I'm going to back up to your pictures folder instead. Backing up to the same hard drive is not really a backup. Just remember, all hard drives fail. I'll say that again. All hard drives fail. It's not a question of if, it's just a question of when. Okay. Okay. So I've been talking about catalogue management. It's a really dry subject. It's not very creative, but it helps everybody sleep at night. I have a 46-page ebook you can download from my website. It's free. It's also a course at a college. So you're getting free education today. Optimize. Okay, so here's a picture that I've taken in my local town. It's a raw file. So I'm going to press the F key, the D key, and we're in the develop module. Okay, we're in soft proofing. I don't know the output yet, so I'm going to switch off soft proofing and just edit it. We'll go into the basic panel. I also use solo mode like Julianne Cost. Right click, choose solo mode. It stops you having to scroll if you've got a screen that doesn't have good screen real estate, basically every laptop. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on auto because you can. Sometimes auto is not very nice, so you can do Command Z. Okay, auto's not that bad, so I'm just going to double click the exposure slider because I think it's a little bit bright. I'm going to go to the transform panel and I'm going to click auto because this guy's got an uncanny knack of straightening things that I didn't even know was crooked. And like Julianne Cost, I can't hold my camera straight. It's obviously, my wife says it's because my head is crooked. Okay, so this, there's nothing more annoying for some people than having a horizon line that slopes like 1 degree. Some people can't see it. Other people feel compelled to straighten the picture frame on the wall so the horizon isn't going downhill. Okay, so that was quite quick. I'm going to use a graduated filter. Some photographers will say, I add them in front of the lens. I don't need to add them in Photoshop. Okay, I'm going to show you one reason why in this instance, just notice I said that, in this instance, it's actually better than using one in front of the camera. I'm coming down there and dragging that down. Now, Julianne Cost went in and removed some of the paint, the masking color, so it didn't darken the beacon on the left and the Spirit of Tasmania on the right. I'm much lazier than Julianne, so what I would do is, bringing the exposure down, I would just take the shadows up. That works. Now, graduated filters in front of camera lenses can't do that. You darken everything or nothing. I've darkened the highlights and opened up the shadows. I've pushed 2 bands of tonality in different directions. Okay, I'm going to add another graduated filter. This is a pre-dawn shot, and I don't know whether you get up at dawn. I get up as a photographer a lot at dawn, and you'll see the sky go from orange through aqua to blue. But I'm shooting with a long telephoto lens, so the audience or the viewer doesn't get to see the blue that I'm actually experiencing. So some people would claim this is cheating. This is just my way of expressing myself and showing what I experienced. Is I'm just going to double click the word effect to zero all of the sliders. I'm going to put in a cold temperature and then drag that down from the top, like so. And now you're experiencing the fade that I was actually seeing there. And I might drag some exposure in as well. And click. And so I've got that transition. Notice there's a little bit of a step that you're seeing there. I can't see that on my screen. That's an out of gamut color banding on the data projector. Okay. Sometimes when you see things, they're not there when you go to another device. And that's also an advantage of soft proofing to see. If I'd have arrived, maybe 2 days ago, I could have got a profile for the data projector and then worked out which colors would be problematic. For my screen, that's a very smooth transition. For you, it's not. Okay, so let's moving forward. Okay, so generally I get bored after editing an image for 3 minutes, so generally I'm in and out in 3 minutes. Sometimes I struggle to do what I want to do in 3 minutes, so I will use presets. Okay, all of my presets are available from my website, from the download section. They're all free. When you click on these, there's also a movie, how to install presets into Lightroom. Okay, it's quite easy thing to do. Okay, so a lot of people, this is actually a profession, a colorist, who grade images, typically for movies or even for stills, is you start out with the colors the camera saw, but for emotive purposes, to convey mood, we'll often skew the colors away from what they appeared in reality. Okay, how many scenes have you seen in winter where everything is very, very blue? There's a famous scene in Gladiator where he's in Germany in the winter, and then it switches in a second to Rome in the summer, and we go from blue to orange. They're trying to, and everything is ramped in different directions. They're not faithful colors. They're using color for emotive purposes, and that's what I'm doing here. There's a picture of Hereford Cathedral. No, it's Worcester Cathedral, and here's the image. Okay, and if I just click there, there's no adjustments on the right-hand side. I could try getting what I'm looking for. I can just come over to my presets panel. Notice I roll down, the preview at the top is changing, so I don't actually have to click on them. I'm looking at this one going, that's really quite nice. There we go. That's moved like 15 sliders, vignettes, graduated filters. It's popped it all into one thing. Okay. And often when you do this, there are a couple of things you want to change, a bit like auto. You might want to fiddle with some things, because getting a preset that works fabulously on all images is never going to be possible, but we can get perhaps 90% of the way there. Okay. So, another thing, tone curve. Command 2, there's the tone curve. Curves, when Photoshop first was launched, do you remember that, well, you don't know whether you remember, but do you know that Photoshop predates the first DSLR by 1 year? Okay, Photoshop came out in 1990. The first DSLR, which I used, was in 1991. Unfortunately, Kodak, who made the first DSLR, didn't know what Adobe had done, so I had to walk around with a black and white TV on my hip, which converted the digital signal back to analog so we could see the digital picture. Okay, but obviously the first Photoshop, that's what is its raison d'etre, was to be able to display a digital image digitally. Okay, so but in the first Photoshop, the king of all tone editing tools was the curves. Okay, some photographers still think it is the hero element. Okay, inside of Photoshop, you can, because it's flawed. Curves is a flawed tool because the engineers really didn't know what they were doing because nothing had preceded Photoshop. And so there are errors that the curves make. We can work around those errors in Photoshop by techniques that I used to teach called luminosity masking. They're very slow, very complex, laborious ways of adjusting tone inside of Photoshop. Okay? Tone curve in Lightroom has no ability for luminosity masks, so it can't stop the damage that tone curves can invoke. So let's take a look at that. Here's a picture that I shot in Darwin. I'll be going back up to Darwin on Friday evening, and I'm going to bring in, on a preset, a snapshot, something that I've edited with a curve. Okay. So generally what I've done is I've tried to pull down the highlights to make the very bright shirt a little bit darker so we can see the texture and pattern. But notice some very unnatural tones that have appeared around the face. The transition between highlights and shadows is no longer comfortable. Now, if you've got any experience with curves, you can see exactly where that problem lies on the curve. It's on the plateau. The plateau is too flat, okay? Basically, I'll just hit the reset there, just momentarily, linear, because when you pull down highlights, it flows through to the adjacent midtones and shadows. So then we have to pull them back up to restore, and when you get that plateau, you get the problem. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, instead of using that, I'll just put linear again, is the Photoshop engineers just decided, how do you adjust highlights without affecting midtones and shadows? The answer is, it's a slider called highlights. There is no roll-on effect to the midtones and shadows. It took the engineers 10 years to perfect that tool. Why some photographers still insist on using tone curves, I have no idea. Okay, but some people still like to think that the tone curve is the hero tool and the basics, because it's got that word basic, is maybe inferior, and it's actually the other way around. Basics are have more control than tone curve. We'll just do a before and after, or a comparison look there. And what we'll do is, you can see the curve. I'll just hit the tab. You can see what curves did and what highlights did. If you can, I don't know whether you know this, but if I just bring that panel up on the left-hand side, on any snapshot or history state, you can right-click and say, copy this snapshot to the before. So you can compare the current state with any state from your histories or from your snapshots, if you're trying to see, is this better than it was 20 edits ago? Okay, so let's go back into just normal view and cycle through. Here's, while I'm in the develop module, when you're importing images, I've noticed some photographers, they're building previews on import. They dive into the first image that imports because they want to edit it before the other 999 have come in, and then start cycling forward through the images that are importing in the develop module. That is bad working practice. The previews you're building work in the library module, and the develop module feels compelled to redraw a preview. So that's another thing that slows workflows down. First of all, before you do any developing, cycle through all of your images in the library module, okay? And then only dive into the develop module with your rated images. That speeds up your workflow. Okay, so let's just hide that left panel, or just go into full screen view. We'll go into the library module. Smart previews. This is revolutionized, okay, the workflows. There are two things actually that's revolutionizing workflows: artificial intelligence and these smart previews. Okay. And this is smart workflows, so we're going to be spending a little bit of time on these. These are actually mini raw files. How do you create a smart preview? There is an option to create smart previews on import. Or, if I just come out of full screen mode and click on the panel on the right, if you click on the original photo below the histogram, it will build a smart preview for this image or the 28 images or the 2,800 images you've selected. It adds about 1 megabyte for every smart preview it adds to your catalogue. Doesn't matter how big your raw file is, you'll be adding a 1 megabyte smart preview into the size of the catalogue that's sitting on your computer, which I don't think is excessive. Okay. Let's just go back into full screen view. It's a raw file, but it's a very small raw file. It's a 4 megapixel raw file. It's 2,560 pixels on its longest dimension. Okay, here's an image that I've got a full preview, full screen preview, because it built the preview when I was importing the image. But the drive this image is living on is in that bag down there. It's not actually connected to the computer. Okay, let's just come out and go into grid view. And you'll see, if I just zoom in on this, you'll see there's an exclamation mark. It's basically saying this image is offline. Okay, I can't edit it. Let's zoom back out. And if I try taking that image into the develop module, it's going to tell me the file could not be found. Okay, I can't edit it. If I go to the panel on the left-hand side, there's no histogram, and I can't move the sliders. I can't give the image to anyone. I can see the image, but I can't work with the image or hand the image over. Okay, so let's just go back into grid view, and we'll have a look at this image. This image is in this collection, but it's actually also living on that drive that's in the very same bag. For this one, however, I've built a smart preview. Okay, the image is offline, but it has a mini raw file in the system. Okay, so if I take that one into the develop module, you'll see I have a histogram. I can edit it. I can edit this image on a plane, even though the image is in my office back in Melbourne. What's more is I can also share the image because I have access to a 2,560 pixel image. So I could send it to Facebook. I can export it to the desktop. Okay, so I actually have an image. So just to show you that, let's go back to the library module and I'll hit export. I have some presets for social media. A lot of people don't know how many pixels are on a screen, yet they're numbers that I'm very familiar with. Like the maximum size that Facebook supports, image size, is 2048 pixels, doesn't support anything larger. Okay, so there's lots of media sizes there that I'm very familiar with. So I built presets for them all. So what I'll do is 2048 pixels. I will sharpen on export and then hit export. And so that's going into a folder called 2048 on my desktop. So let's just take a quick look at that and go into, oops, not Safari, on my web browser. I'll just dock this. Okay, so there's the folder 2048, and there is an image, okay, that is in that bag. But I have a smart preview, so I'm not disconnected. And for most purposes, especially social media, that's large enough. I don't need to reconnect to my RAID drive where the images may live. So that's the first great thing about smart previews, is they're giving us access to some workflows we wouldn't have otherwise had. Okay, so let's go back to my slides. So it's doing more than giving us that ability to edit images offline. It's also giving us the ability to take and look at those images on our mobile devices. Because when we use those collections that are synchronized, giving it permission to synchronize basically pushes smart previews for all of the files in that collection up to Adobe's cloud. We get a certain amount of gigabytes worth of storage with our cloud membership, but it doesn't impact on that storage. Adobe store these for free. Well, as part of our membership, our member benefits, let's say. And so we can put tens of thousands of images up to the Adobe cloud, and our storage capacity doesn't come down on our personal storage. What that does, that mini raw file now is sitting in Adobe's cloud, and what it can do is it can act as a way of synchronizing how that raw file behaves on our smartphones, on our tablets, on our laptops and our desktops. So if I change the image on any one of those devices, it changes on all of them. Okay, it synchronizes across all of my media. So I no longer get images stranded with their individual edits on one of my devices. It now flows through to all devices. Okay, to give you an example of this, let's just, we'll just take this into the develop module, okay? And if I'll bring up my web browser, which I think I docked. And I'll hit done. Okay, so we got this image of the guy on a bicycle on the same bridge as we were looking at before. Here he is in color because it's synchronizing. We're not looking at a JPEG in a window there. That's actually a live feed to a raw file that's in Adobe's cloud and on my laptop and on my computer at home and on my mobile phone. Okay, so if and this is the really weird thing, is we can, I was going to do this on Lightroom, but I could actually just come in here. Okay, so, could not, don't know why I did that. So it was working this morning. Okay, I'll just tell you what should have happened in this particular workflow. We've got it. We're back. Okay, so what we're doing is we've got a full screen preview. Remember, it's 2,560 pixels large. We can even click edit this photo. Now, I'm not in Lightroom Mobile on my phone or my tablet. I'm in a web browser. In this instance, it's Safari. This is a raw image open in a web browser, and I can choose to hit black and white. In about 1 minute, because it's not instantaneous, because that information has to go back up to Adobe's Creative Cloud. I'll just bring up that web browser, because what I should do is hit save and exit. Okay, in about a minute's time, that edit will appear back on my laptop. Now that server farm that we've been looking at is probably somewhere in the States. Okay, so keep an eye on that preview because it will switch to black and white depending on, there we go. Okay, so I could edit images in a web browser in an internet cafe and carry on doing business even if my computer's been stolen and my mobile phone has been stolen and my tablet has been stolen, but I can carry on working with my raw files on a cafe in some backwater somewhere and start sending those images to clients. Because remember, with that gallery, with that public link, art directors or clients can see those images, they can download these images, they can like those images, they can comment on those images. And if they comment on those images in the web browser, they will appear back in Lightroom in the comments panel. So I can have a discussion about an image that's on a web browser in Lightroom. Okay. So So let's just go back into full screen view. Synchronized apps. When I've been teaching people who aspire to get into the high-end advertising photography market and have to deal with clients and art directors, it's very, very important that they work non-destructively because, as Julianne said, art directors change their mind. That's what they do. And so we must always work with the ability to undo what we've been doing with the least amount of pain. The only completely non-destructive workflow is the one that Adobe owns. If you work with another editing app that can work with raw files and optimize raw files, if you then need to move it into Photoshop, you will have to what's called rasterize. You have to write that data out so it's no longer a raw file in order to get it into Photoshop. But if you work with Lightroom, you never have to rasterize the raw data. And I'm going to show you that workflow. And because this seminar is called Smart Workflows, we're going to be dealing with smart objects and smart filters. Okay, so when we take images out of Lightroom, we need a damn good reason to take images out of Lightroom, i.e. Lightroom can't do what we need to do to an image. So I just thought I would just cherry pick some of the instances why we go into Photoshop. Because Photoshop is quite a slow beast compared to Lightroom, because most of the image optimization, I do very little retouching or optimization of images anywhere other than Lightroom. Now, the defaults for working in our external editors is usually Pro Photo 16 bits. That is the default. If you don't change them, that is what you get, that top section. Now, those settings are okay if when you've finished editing your image, it is coming back into Lightroom and you export it for a client as a JPEG or a PSD or a TIFF from Lightroom. If your workflow doesn't do that, if you've edited in Photoshop and you save it to the desktop from Photoshop, I would warn you that Pro Photo is a minefield, that you can wreck your images using Pro Photo. Okay? It has a color gamut that is bigger than the human spectrum. It cannot work in anything other than 16-bit, otherwise it will band and step and posterize your images. Actually, the professional workspace is not Pro Photo, it's Adobe RGB. That's what most professionals use because it has a much smaller gamut, but its gamut is large enough to cover sRGB, monitor web space profiles, and also CMYK. It covers most of those two spaces. And so it still gives us the choice to work commercially. But the rule of thumb for working with color gamuts is work with a color gamut no bigger than the one you actually have to need. So although Pro Photo is non-destructive, you've got to bring it back into Lightroom as that Pro Photo file. If you were going to start exporting images from Photoshop, I would recommend dropping down to Adobe RGB. If you're not intending to alter tone or color anymore, you're just adding text or compositing or blurring something, then I would also encourage you to drop the bit depth to 8, because Photoshop will work 3 or 4 times faster at 8-bit than 16. Okay, so let's take a look at this example. I shot this in Broadway in Manhattan. Okay, we'll just go in and I'll right-click. Okay. There is no keyboard shortcut for this one. I wish there was, but there isn't. This is the non-destructive workflow. Open as Smart Object, not the top one, which is Command or Control-E. It's open as Smart Object in Photoshop. Okay, there is going to be a delay because what Lightroom is doing now is it's going to duplicate the raw file and it's going to embed that raw file in a layer inside of Photoshop. Okay. So let's move over to Photoshop, see if it's done it. There it is. Okay. So this is not a background layer. This is carrying the file name, because inside of this smart object, I'll just show you if you're not used to seeing the icon. This is the smart object icon. And if we wanted to make any adjustments, like already the art director's changed their mind, we haven't done anything yet, but we've just opened it in Photoshop and they've already saying, not sure about the saturation, you can go double click and it opens it in Adobe Camera Raw, which uses exactly the same processing engine, raw processing engine, as the develop module in Lightroom. So I can adjust any of the settings that I previously adjusted in Lightroom. Okay. So for instance, if I just, let's just pull down the saturation. If I clicked OK, that rewrites all of the information and changes it there. No curves, no hue saturation. I'm doing it at the native bit depth of the sensor. Okay, so it's the least destructive way to edit tone and color is not to use curves, hue saturation or levels, but to go back into the Camera Raw editing tools to edit using the most sophisticated tools the engineers have developed. And yes, that includes highlights and shadows. Okay, I'll just do Command Z. What I'll do is, it's a smart object, so what I'll do is I'll go Filter, Blur Gallery, Tilt Shift. Okay, Tilt Shift. And what I'll do is I'll make it even narrower, so the fall off of focus is quite extreme. It was quite fashionable a few years ago, made famous by a New York photographer. And what I'm just going to do is just pull that down, maybe just, go away. It wants me to pull it down. I'll just pull the focus down to that guy crossing the crossing there. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to increase the amount of blur. Okay, and select OK. Now, one of the main reasons that I'm doing this in Photoshop and not Lightroom is there are no good blur filters in Lightroom. Okay, we have lens blur, Gaussian blur, surface blur, box blur. All of the good blur stuff is all in Photoshop. I dare say one day it might appear in Lightroom, but to this date there is nothing that is useful for blurring stuff. Okay, yes, we can wind the sharpness down to -100. The clarity at -100 is particularly ugly, okay? But here we've got very sophisticated blur tools, especially lens blur, which can emulate blur with a defocused lens. It's the most sophisticated blur we've got. Now, okay, and it's been applied as a smart filter. So if the art director said, that's too much blur, I would just double click and we go back into the filter dialog. So again, it's completely non-destructive. We're blurring a raw file, which is a smart object, using a smart filter. Okay, so let's just hit cancel. I'll save this edit, Command S, and then I'll close this edit, Command W, and I'll go back into Lightroom, and there is the blurred file. Okay. If you save to the default location inside of Photoshop, it's automatically re-imported into your Lightroom catalog alongside the original raw file. This is where I now export it as a JPEG for the client. So I could have left the Pro Photo 16 bits because now I'm doing that down sampling, and Lightroom has got you covered for this. Photoshop can lead you astray with profiles, bit depths. You've got to get the order right, whereas Lightroom always has your back. So images should be coming back into Lightroom as a smart workflow. Okay, another example which we can, there's the original raw file. Here's another image, okay. I will also open this as a smart object, okay. So edit in, open as smart object. One of the high-end retouching techniques that a lot of clients don't want to pay for because it's quite time consuming is a technique called frequency separation. It's particularly done for glamour cosmetic. If you walk into Myers or David Jones and you look at these 12-foot faces, okay, they've got skin. They're not airbrushed. They actually have skin, but it's perfect skin. And they've done this by separating the high frequency, the skin pores, on one layer and the broader shape and colour on the other. How many times have you used a healing brush tool close to lips or eyeshadow and it's sucked in a smudge of tone? That doesn't work. That doesn't happen in frequency separation because the colour and tone is on a separate layer to the detail. It's called frequency separation. I don't have the 3 hours to do it here with you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a filter called Imaginomic Portraiture 2, which will do it for me. It's not as good as the real thing, but it's not bad. So I'll just drag this woman into view so you can see it, and I'll let go. Okay. So it's particularly good at resolutions under 24 megapixels. It's not really good at medium format, but it's almost instantaneous. You can fine-tune the range of colours so it avoids lipstick or eyeshadow, and you can create your own presets and you can increase or decrease the effect. I'll just take smoothing normal. Let's just zoom into 100% for those people who really need to see what's going on there. Can you see it's smoothing out? But it's not blurring the fine details. It's only blurring areas of a particular skin hue. That's its sole purpose, really, is just to blur skin hues. But keep the fine detail. It's actually using the frequency separation algorithms to do this. Okay. One of the things is that wall that this woman's sitting in front of is too close to a skin hue. So what I would do is I would fill this mask with black, Command I, so no frequency separation now, and then just get a brush with white as the foreground colour, and we'll work at 100%, and I'll just paint over the skin. That's it. I'll save it, and I'll close it, and I'll go back into Lightroom. And there is the edited version. Okay, so when I was teaching high-end commercial retouching, I always said, here's the 2-minute version, here's the 20-minute version, here's the 2-hour version, because then you can offer the client. They will always want the 2-minute version. Well, they want to pay for the 2-minute version. They actually want the 2-hour version, if they can see the difference. If they can't see the difference, you only give them the 2-minute version. Okay, so let's, moving forward. This image is not offline. This was an offline version, but I'm going to edit this image as well. So we'll just go in and right-click. And I often forget where the menus, what are in the menus, because I hardly ever go there. I right-click and use, my options are there right in front of my mouse. So I don't go up to menus. I just right-click, edit in. And this time, this is actually a layered file because I've saved a selection, which you probably didn't want me to do live. So I'm going to get edit in Photoshop CC, and I'm going to edit the original. If you've re-imported a multi-layered file, you don't open a smart object anymore. You open the original so you can see your layers. Avoid a workflow where you bring images back in to Lightroom and then you carry on working on them in Lightroom. That is a bad workflow. It'll do your head in. So you always take it back into Photoshop if you need to tweak the file there. So I'm editing the original. Okay, and this is a smart object. There are only a few things that we can't do in a smart object workflow, which I don't like doing, but I have to because it doesn't work using smart objects. You'll notice a lot of tools, for instance, they don't actually work on smart objects. So for instance, if I go and grab a spot healing brush tool, it says that tool doesn't work on a smart object because it's a non-destructive layer. You cannot damage or work or paint on these pixels. So I can't heal that, but that doesn't mean to say I can't at all. So I just can't directly to that smart object. But if I created a new layer sitting above that smart object, the tool is now functional and I can click and drag and remove that line. And that heal or edit is not on the smart object, it's sitting on an empty layer above the smart object. I've been selling these workflows for a long time. Your library will have one of my books, I guarantee it. Okay, and Photoshop CC, Essential Skills, don't buy it, it's 5 years out of date, but it will introduce you to these non-destructive smart object workflows. Okay, so I'll just throw that away, just hit delete. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a Command J and rasterize the layer. It's always used to tickle some of my students who could only think about dreadlocks when I use the word rasterize. But what it's done is it's put the image, not a raw file now in a smart object, but it's written it as an RGB flat layer. What I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to load a selection I created earlier. Okay. I'm going to invert that selection so everything around this long border is selected. This is another thing we can't do inside of Lightroom. I'm going to come into Filter, Blur Gallery, Path Blur. Okay, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try, because a lot of people commented that if you shoot somebody at 4,000th of a second, it almost looks like they're not moving at all. This is particularly the case with longboarding because the bicycle isn't leaning over, the horse isn't in mid-air. It looks like the guy might have just been about to fall off a stationary skateboard. Okay, so I really need to put some post-production blur. So I'll just zoom out. Notice what I'm doing. This arrow is saying which is the direction of the motion. Okay, so this is going north to south now. This is where it gets really clever. Okay, I'm arcing the blur. And you can play with this and get it absolutely perfect. And you can slow it down at one end and speed it up at the other, and you can put in additional paths of motion. You can really create a good post-production blur. I'll just click OK. And it's quite an, it has to do a lot of maths in order to do this, I have to say. And so, and because I shoot with a 42 megapixel camera, it's taken its time. Okay, so there's a path blur. Now I would also do the reflections in the visor, because I try and do a 3-minute edit online and they say, Mark, you forgot. But likewise, they wouldn't have watched a 30-minute movie. So I would do the visor, I would also do the wheels, okay, with more path blurs. So I'll just save that and close that and go back to Lightroom. See how quick things are? Okay, and we'll move forward. And there's the path blur. Okay, so website, I've told you about my website, downloads. These 3 projects here, you get to download the images that I'm using, okay? There's also an extended movie, okay? And those 3 tutorials is a 12-week course in 2 universities, okay? And it's free, okay? I've been teaching high-end compositing for a very long time because in advertising, 95% of everything is composited, even if it doesn't look like it. Shot of a beer bottle, beer, label, cap, 3 layers, 3 shots, all dropped in. Okay, so what's happening here is an example, and 5 minutes. Okay, so this may be the last one that I have to do. Okay, so so much I wanted to say. I'm going to let you follow those tutorials online, because I'm going to move to another one that's not online. I'm going to do this one, Command D, edit original, because it's a multi-layered finished edit. Okay, and this one introduces something else that's been changing in our workflows of late, and that is there's an image I captured. It's had some frequency separation, so the model's got really good skin. And what we're doing now is the client says, but it's winter, so we need snow. Okay, that is a stock file. How did I get the stock file? I went to Libraries, Search, Snow. I wait for it to search, and then when the snow comes, I didn't photo. There you go, try that again. Oh, there we go. So you find your stock, you drag it over from the panel into your composite. It's got a watermark. You think, but it works. You right-click on the stock image, say purchase, ka-ching, your Creative Cloud account is debited. Okay, if you only buy one of these every second month, it'll be $11. Okay, and it's your image to use for whatever reason till you die. Okay, you've purchased all of the copyright free stuff. One of the things in the movie making, which is very popular, is post-production flair, because it's a bugger to control in the studio. And so post-production flair is often added later. And if you don't want to buy Flare files, I've got 24 Flare files. You can download them from my website for free. It's also action, so you don't even have to remember the correct blend mode, because the action will do everything for you. A dialogue will pop up halfway through, inviting you to read it. I would encourage you to read it, otherwise it may not work. Okay. And for anybody who does graphic design here, just remember the best way to get in a graphic, an EPS from Illustrator, which is a vector file, not a pixel file, is to drag it in, okay, because it will come in as a vector, not as a pixel. If you get that workflow wrong, Photoshop will want to rasterize the file. This will scale to 1,000 feet tall or very small, okay, and then you'll be able to work with that as a vector. Okay, I'll close that file. Just wanted to touch on a couple more things before we end the session. So let's just take a look at my Lightroom. Okay, so, and as I said, I've got borders, textures, gritty, grungy edges. They're all free. Paul Burnett was doing a hair extraction, okay? I've taken this to absolutely the nth degree, and it's absolutely the best quality if you can shoot the model on a black, grey or white background. Those become green screen and blue screen for Photoshop, which isn't a blue screen, green screen program. And if you get that right, you get absolutely the best quality. I created a movie. It seems to be very popular, 161,000 views. Most people thumbs up, not thumbs down. A couple of people say, why did you choose such an easy background as grey that has such good contrast for the hair? My answer is because I'm not stupid. And I don't like to spend more than 5 minutes editing. Why did you ask the question? I know I'm compositing, I'm a commercial photographer. I don't randomly shoot people and then 3 months later saying, this would be good in an advert. Okay, so that is a workflow for commercial high-end editing of hair. It is absolutely the best workflow. I didn't read this in a book, I made it up myself. Okay, there's my creative lens flares and fabulous flare effects, a little bit of alliteration there. I haven't got time to talk about smart collections. Did you know that you don't have to export an image from Lightroom to the desktop and then upload it to Facebook? You can publish it directly from Lightroom without leaving Lightroom. And it comes preloaded with Flickr and Facebook, and you have to link your accounts to it. But you can also get plugins online for Instagram. Now this one's really quite unique because Instagram don't want people to upload images to Instagram from your computers. The guy who wrote the code for this one, did I tell you it's free? Was very clever because he's worked out how you can complete with all of your keywords. You can thank him by giving him a donation. It's donate where. Okay. So we're 1 minute out. Let's just take a look. I'm just going to go 1 minute over. A lot of people buy. I keep on getting adverts when I'm logged in for Wix. You know, you can buy a commercial website building. Adobe give you one. It's called My Portfolio. I don't know why some people miss this. If you're a Creative Cloud member, you have the ability to build a website, and it's one of those websites that will look good on a mobile phone held vertically, an iPad held horizontally, or a laptop or a desktop computer. It reconfigures itself through orientation. That's called myportfolio.com. Okay, so I'll just finish up by saying that I am very easy to find online. I am the only Mark Gaylor in Australia. There are no others, so it's just me. And you will find me, and you can message me on Facebook. I do consultancy for companies. I do one-on-ones. I do small workshops. If you can gather 7 friends together, I will happily come and give you a workshop, or you can come down to where I live and we'll work there, because I do every aspect of workflow, from off-camera flash to desktop publishing to Lightroom to Photoshop to photography. Okay, hopefully you learnt one thing, because I know I always feel pleased if I sit through something, so long as I can take one thing away. I know for some of you there's probably some homework involved, downloading and reading, but I take great pride in mastering the craft. My grandfather was a craftsman, my father was a craftsman. I take great pride. I like to be creative, but I also like to be in control. And I think that makes us very comfortable when we talk to other professionals. We can look them in the eye, and especially when it comes to color management, when the magazine is all green, you can look the client in the eye and say, that wasn't my fault. That was somebody else's fault. Knowing and having that comfort in your own profession, I think, is a very valuable asset. It keeps your heads held high. Thank you for bearing with me today. You've been a very good audience. No one fell asleep, which is very good. And so have a glorious lunch. You'll see me out on the floor for the next 5 or 10 minutes if you have a burning question. Okay, thanks.